So hello and welcome back to my channel. This week you get a rare treat. We're going to be going out of the house. I'm going to film none of this in the office. We're going to go fully on location. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about focal lengths. What are they? Why do they matter? You know, what do things look like if we use different focal lengths? So let's get out there, let's start shooting, let's work out what things look like at different focal lengths. So in typical fashion, I've come out in the middle of August and it's threatening to rain. So that might cut this a little bit short, but yeah, we're just going to talk about focal lengths today and kind of, you know, what it really means to the image. So I'll start by saying I'm on a 14mm lens here, which is super wide. And to be honest, I think it distorts. It's actually too wide. It's not a lens I'd use on a person very often, but it's the only lens I've got for vlogging, if we call it that. So it's what you're getting for now. So the real problem with a lens like this is, to be honest, it kind of makes me look like an egg. You know, I've got this stopped down because it's quite bright today and also has a sort of a weird concave shaped lens, so we can't actually put ND filters on it, which is another issue. But yeah, I mean, it's just not a very flattering look. I mean, as I kind of move around, obviously I'm holding this about half a meter from my face, so it's incredibly wide. I'm getting a lot in, but it just doesn't look very nice. You know what I mean? It doesn't make me look flattering, it doesn't make me look good. So, you know, you're always sacrificing that a bit for the extra width you get on a lens this big. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is probably a little bit wider even than most kind of like YouTubers would actually go. I know a really popular lens for Sony is a 16 to 35mm lens, and this one's a 14. So, you know, it's a little bit wider again. I actually bought this city property. It's really good at making a space look huge. You can see a lot, obviously, from the camera. I mean, I'm literally very close to this, and you're getting a huge amount in the frames. It does have its advantages in that regard. Just to let you guys know why I'm not actually kind of walking and talking as I do this. A, it's because we've had a year of lockdowns and I'm very unfit. And B, it's because I'm using active stabilization on this camera, which, to be honest, as you might even be able to see in this image, when I kind of move, if I kind of shake up and down, it tries to stabilize it, but it also kind of creates a really weird kind of warpy gyro effect, which I don't want. So yeah, I'm going to kind of stop every now and then and talk to you guys about these lenses. Oh, and reason number 3, which kind of ties into reason number 1, is even on a relatively small setup, I've not got a monitor, I've not got any of the usual things that I would use to shoot when I'm doing professional video. This is still really damn heavy. Holding it in one hand with a little tiny tripod that I've got attached, this still gets very weighty and it starts to kind of, you know, get some shake in my hand and things like that. So yeah, I'm just gonna do really kind of quick takes so we don't get too much of the, you know, fucking shaky hand movement. So I've probably waffled on a little bit as I walked there, but let's get back to the question. What is a focal length? Why does it matter? And what does it really do to your image? Well, as I've mentioned, this one's a 14mm, so it's very, very wide, and we're getting that kind of warped, almost fisheye perspective, which, you know, works for some things, doesn't work for others. If you've ever played a video game, you might recognize a field of view slider, and that's basically what a focal length is. It's essentially how zoomed in or how zoomed out of the image you are. But it does change more than just kind of the zoom, it does also change the perspective. And as you kind of move in or move out, it also changes the look of someone, it changes how someone's face looks, it changes the depth perception of the background, it changes a whole host of things. Well, I'm glad I came somewhere with decent tree protection because it started raining again. August 19th, it's meant to be the summer. I'm also actually really interested in just how wobbly this active stabilization is going to be. If it's actually usable, that'll be a really sort of good feature, and you know, I don't know how often I'd use it, but if you are a vlogger or someone that YouTubes this kind of way a lot, then that would be a great feature on the Fx3. So I'm instantly starting to think this might have been a mistake timing wise, because I do not have a waterproof cover for this camera or for myself, and we're now getting quite rained on quite heavily. Right, so I'm going to start making my point here. This is a shot from tree cover because it's raining still. But yeah, this is a shot at 24mm looking out over this field. So I'm on a big zoom lens now. I've got a 24 to 240 10 times Sony zoom. So as I zoom in a bit, I'm just going to show you kind of what changes. And obviously I'm not going to move the camera back, so this is just going to be a zoom. But let's just see what happens on this first, and then I'll show you a proper example. So that's now zoomed into about 50mm, trying to get a similar exposure. Into 70mm, 100mm, 150mm, and all the way into 240mm with a very not good autofocus apparently. There we go, got it. I tell you what, one thing I'm very quickly learning is how difficult this kind of test is to do on your own. I don't know how all these YouTubers do these kind of extensive tests, you know, going out on their own. Maybe they don't, maybe they've got help. But yeah, working out focus, working out where the camera needs to be, you know, all that kind of stuff on your own is very difficult. Right, so I'm not sure how well this is going to work, but I'm just going to try it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take short videos at different focal lengths. I'm going to move the camera back, but I'm going to try and stay in line with this tree. So you'll see kind of as the shot moves back, as the shot zooms in, just how that changes the entire look of the image. So I'll start at what I was already on, which is the 24mm on the big zoom lens I've got. So this is what it looks like 24mm. It's probably quite wide. Well, it is quite wide. I can see it on the monitor. For me, it's not a very flattering shot, makes me look quite big, makes me look quite wide. Not a lovely shot, but let's start moving the camera back and zooming in further. So this is now a very similar image at 35mm. I've moved the camera back a foot or two and zoomed in to that new focal length. So this should look a bit more flattering. This will be a bit more like a portrait. The exposure is probably whacked because we're in the sun, but let's see what that looks like. So this is it at 50mm. I'm gonna have to balance these exposures out a little bit in post because this lens won't keep an exposure the whole way through. It kind of stops down and, you know, lets in less light as it zooms in. But let's try and expose them as close as we can to get this to be as similar an image as possible. Okay, so we're now up to just over 70mm. I might have to kind of move the framing and stuff a little bit as this might be a bit wrong. Obviously, as you change your focal length, you're also going to change what's in the frame. You might have to aim up, might have to aim down, things like that as well. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay, so we're now all the way up to 100mm and we're going to have to start boosting the ISO a little bit as my lens won't let in any more light at this point. So again, boost the ISO, keep the exposure the same, but this is going to start looking like a very, very different type of shot now. Right, so at the risk of this experiment getting boring, I'm going to start zooming up a little bit through the ranges. We're now at 150mm and I should be really kind of, you know, flattened out to the background now. The background is going to start getting compressed in towards me and it's going to start looking like, personally, a much more flattering shot, although probably going past the kind of, you know, portrait range at this point. Right, so we're now at 240mm. At this focal range, I can't even see the camera. I have no idea what this looks like. Hopefully I'm in frame, but yeah, this is now a real kind of telephoto lens. You probably wouldn't shoot people at this range very often, unless you're going for some sort of cool long range shot, but yeah, be interesting to see what this comes out like. So this has now gone the whole way through the zoom lens from the 40mm you saw me in earlier, all the way to 240mm at the top of this big lens. It's also worth bearing in mind that this lens isn't an autofocus lens, so I'm trying to keep this in focus as I go, but you know, there might be parts where it kind of comes out and you might lose me a little bit, but you're just gonna have to get on with that. It's also one of those typically British days where the sun is very, very bright, but for some reason, half the world's still in massive amount of shade. So you're gonna get huge, huge highlight spots as I walk through these trees. And then you won't be able to see me. So yeah, that's another thing you're just gonna have to deal with. So really the key to understanding focal lengths is really to kind of, you know, get your head around why you'd use different ones and kind of how that works and how it affects the image. So in the test back there, you'll have seen kind of, you know, what different sort of qualities each kind of focal length has, you know, how that image starts to change as you go through the ranges. But what's really important is working out, okay, well, if I know that and I know what it looks like at different ranges, why am I going to use a different focal length for this X type of shot I'm going to do? I've just absolutely shit myself, walked into this field and there's like a, I don't know, some sort of bird, what they call game sort of thing, just fucking takes off from right next to me. Bloody nearly gave me a heart attack. At the risk of my exposure being even worse than it probably is for the rest of this video, I'm going to step out into the very bright sunlight, which has actually gotten really nice. Got blue skies behind me for the first time today, or actually in a couple of days. But yeah, as I was saying, it really comes down to sort of some really basic film theory and kind of what you're trying to do with your scene. So, you know, what is it you're trying to portray in your scene? Are you trying to be kind of close to someone, really involved in their emotions? Are you further away? Are you observing, for example, which is when you definitely go back and use a really long zoom lens? Or do you really want to kind of feel like you're in the scene with someone? Because if that's the case, then, you know, a lot of time you might want to use a wider angle lens and get really close. Think of a film like The Revenant, if you've seen it, where, you know, they use really wide lenses, much wider than they tend to use in most films, and they kind of got really in amongst the action. Partly to do with, you know, the gimbals and how they were operating the cameras, but also to make you feel like you were there and you were living through that experience. So yeah, a lot of times it really comes down to kind of, you know, what your shot is about. And this is something you really do need to think about when you're choosing whether it's what lens you're using or what kind of zoom you're going to use if you want a zoom lens. I was working on a short film the other day and I was DPing it, so my kind of focus on that project is to obviously determine what it's going to look like and why, you know what I mean? Like, why is a certain shot going to be tight? Why is a certain shot going to be wider? And all those kind of things. And the simplest and most easy way to describe the choices I was making in terms of lenses was, what is the relation between the camera and the actor or the character in this scene really? You know what I mean? As I mentioned before, are we close? Are we trying to kind of, you know, understand their emotions, really kind of see what's going on their face? Or are we kind of just observing, is there something going on? Is there an action going on? Can we just watch what they're doing in the scene? Those are the kind of things that I think about and then make the choices based on that. Another thing you're going to want to consider when you're choosing what focal length to use is anything out of focus in your scene? You know, do you want that depth of field, or are you just happy to have everything in focus? Because the wider you go in general, the more you're going to see, the more it's going to be in focus, and the more you zoom in, as you'll have seen back there on the test, you're going to start throwing the background out of focus and really separating the subject from the background. Now, a lot of the times this is kind of seen as a cinematic kind of like, expensive look, you know what I mean? So if you can get depth of field in your shots, a lot of the time it's going to look better and it's going to make people think, or at least perceive that image to be a better one. But if you watch a film and you look at kind of the wide shots when they're establishing a scene, you probably won't have that much depth of field. You're probably going to see most things in the image because, again, they're establishing shots. They're trying to show you the scene or everything that's in the area. So you really need to understand how depth of field relates to your focal length as well. Basically, the more you go up, the more you're going to get, but also you're going to be losing field of view. So, you know, there's all these different factors you've got to kind of work against each other and decide and play off. For a really clear example of what I mean, all you need to do is look at this shot. On the 14mm lens, you get in the background. It is out of focus, but you can still see it quite clearly. It's not really thrown out. I'm not really separated from what's going on behind me. And sometimes that might not be what you want to do. Sometimes, you know, you might kind of want to not see what's going on behind or not really kind of feel that detail. But on this style of lens, especially when you're vlogging or something like this really doesn't matter quite as much because in reality, you're trying to pull someone into this and kind of make them feel like you're along for the ride with me. Obviously, I'm talking to you guys as the audience. So, you know, you want to kind of be here as if you're having a conversation with me. Sometimes when you see a YouTube video that's filmed, you know, too long on too much of a long zoom lens, it kind of feels a bit disconnected because that's not how you would speak to someone. I don't go, you know, right across a parking lot and then speak to them from there. That's just not how life goes. These types of wide lenses also have a great sort of ability to make something look absolutely huge. I mean, this field I'm in is big, don't get me wrong, but it looks absolutely huge on this video. So to make one last example, I'm going to show you two very, very different examples of a very similar shot at two focal lengths, which I think are obviously the one we're using now and one that I use a lot and actually really like. So right now you're on the 14mm again, as you can probably tell. I'm probably out of focus because it's not an autofocus lens, so God knows if I've got that right. But yeah, this is what it looks like on a very, very wide lens. You're seeing a lot of the background. I'm not going to be very separated from that. And to be honest, I just don't think this is a very flattering look for someone filming in this regard. I can't think of a time when I would really use this type of lens for a shot like this. However, this is the same shot. I've not moved the tripod at all. I've moved the camera a little bit. I've reframed to obviously make sure I'm still in it because it's a very different kind of frame. But yeah, this is the same shot at a 50mm focal length now. And personally, I think this is a much, much nicer image. This is much closer to something I'd use if I was shooting a promo, if I was shooting in this location on a short film, or really any style of video. This is much closer to what I'd be using. I personally don't really like the look of the 14mm. I think it's great for carrying around on your camera on your hand. Obviously, it's kind of a utility in that function. But I think when you're looking at making an image that's actually nice, this is a much better image, and I'm sure you'd probably agree. The other thing you'll notice here is that the background will be thrown right out of focus if this is worked correctly. You won't be able to see barely any of the detail in that at all. And again, this is something I really like. It separates the subject from the background. It gives you more kind of focus, excuse the pun, on what you're looking at and the subject, and I think it's just a much nicer image overall. Something you really wouldn't get, even if I brought the 14mm really close to me, you wouldn't get that depth of field in the background, and it certainly wouldn't have the same kind of look. So let me know, what do you guys think? Do you like this lens better, or this kind of focal length better as well? Another thing you'll see on this kind of shot as I walk forward slowly is you'll see the perspective change as I get closer to the lens. Now obviously this is not a different lens choice, this is not me affecting the focal length, but it does show what the image looks like as someone gets closer to the lens as well. Something that's going to be very different on each type of lens. If I was on a 14mm lens at this point, I think you'd barely be able to see me. So obviously that's quite a big factor as well. As I was filming the previous shot, I couldn't help but notice just how absolutely insane the autofocus is on this Sony Fx3. So I thought I'd test that again and really kind of show that off, because I know it's not relevant to focal lengths, but it's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? I literally started this shot, you know, probably 20, 30 meters back. I'm gonna get closer and closer to the point where it's gonna be a very tight shot, and it's just gonna absolutely stick on my face. It's not gonna barely move. Even if I get really close, it's still just got my eyes in sharp focus. Honestly, an incredible tool, something that really, really helps out. So I'm gonna become a Sony Fx3 salesman again and say, what a camera. As I wrap up this video, I'm just gonna kind of talk about why I've started sticking on this 50mm since I basically put it on this shoot. And surprisingly, unlike normal, it's not because I'm lazy, it's not because I don't want to change lens again. It's because for me personally, I just think this is a much, much nicer focal length. And obviously we'll see what you guys think. Clearly they serve a different purpose. Clearly this is much more cinematic. This has not got the vlog style, but I think this is how I'd want to see myself on camera. And I think this is how I'd want to portray, you know, the kind of work that I put out there as well, a lot more at least. So for me, I don't really like the 14mm kind of wide angle lens. Clearly it serves a purpose, as I mentioned, but for me, it's just not something I really want to kind of do that often. So, but on the flip side of that, you know, you couldn't take a shot like this into, you know, a big crowded space. I would certainly not want to put this setup down in the middle of, you know, Times Square and start talking to a camera, because I'd feel super awkward and uncomfortable doing it. Whereas when you've got a really wide lens, you can hold it right in front of your face, you know, you feel a bit more inconspicuous, you can kind of move around and do what you want, and it feels a lot more personable. And I think that's what it really comes down to. It's all about what you're trying to portray with your shot. This is a big argument against zoom lenses. Don't get me wrong, I use zoom lenses a lot on the work I do. A lot of it's run and gun. I need to be kind of quick and agile, so I need a zoom lens. But the argument against the zoom lens is that you don't think about what focal length you're at. You don't think about why you're doing it. You just kind of, oh, I need to get closer, let's zoom in. And obviously, if you're trying to create really high quality video, that's not really the way to go. So again, that's a big argument against zoom lenses and why people do tend to prefer primes at the kind of, you know, more professional level. But yeah, we're pretty much going to leave it there for today. I think I've kind of shown you both sides. I've shown you a lot of the wide and that kind of quicker YouTubey sort of style, and I've slowed down towards the end intentionally using this kind of really more cinematic setup lens, you know, something that I would happily shoot on, you know, for a professional type of client. So you're sort of seeing both sides of the spectrum. Don't get me wrong, I know 50mm is not kind of a particularly long lens, but nifty 50, it's a very popular lens, very good portrait. It is flattering even on these warm, sweaty days where I'm out, you know, in my joggers. So yeah, I think that just about wraps it up for today, guys, but I hope I've kind of shown you a bit of different perspective on different focal lengths, kind of what they, not only what they look like, but kind of why you might shoot with them. I know I've not gone super scientific today, and that's definitely on purpose. I didn't want to do a lecture on kind of, you know, how the science in the lens works. I'm not really the person to tell you that, and there's much better content already on YouTube for that. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of share some thoughts with you on these different lengths, why we use them, kind of why we might not use them, and how they kind of generate a different look depending on what you're doing. So we'll leave it there, guys. I'm gonna go home, get a shower, because it's bloody hot out here, even though it's raining on and off. So yeah, we'll see you next week.